If it bleeds, it leads, and we have no difficulty finding all the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad things that are happening around us every single day. It's often the first thing we hear about in the first few minutes of most of our interactions in our environment with people and especially in media. On TV, you're going to hear it. On radio, it's going to be there too. News feeds, of course, it's there. Sadly, the headlines are merely the narrative of the tone and climate of our actual society today. And then we look up and realize that the children are watching. They are feeling, they are experiencing the toxic stress of grown-up mess, and they are left to process it in the most natural and instinctive ways that they know how. Unless we're there to guide, protect, and filter, and translate the onslaught of messages of the circumstances that threaten their childhood, then we're gonna have to ask that question. What shall we tell the children?
Recorded in St. Louis, Missouri, in front of a live studio audience, it's Jade Harrell's Let's Get It Together.
Today's Let's Get It Together show is made possible by the Kwame Foundation with 100% graduation rate for their gentlemen mentees at Carnahan, and the Mending Foundation, hope and solutions for families in need. So to our sponsors, we say thank you. Well, Dennis Waitley said that the greatest gifts you can give your children are the roots of responsibility and the wings of independence. So we polled our audience to see how they handle and approach the social climate with our children. Here are the results. 66% of our audience said they have had to have a heavy talk or the talk with their children. Has the child ever asked a difficult question about what's going on in the news? And if you were at a loss for the answer, 54% said yes. If you ever encountered a young person in your life who wrestles with the news of the world today, an overwhelming 83% of our audience said yes. If you've had a transformational experience that has significantly changed the way you approach issues that you raise with your children, again, 63%, the majority, said yes. Our opinion poll sponsor is Vector Communications. Reach, engage, and communicate. You can add your opinion to our poll on the Let's Get It Together website at lgi2.com. That's LGI, the number 2.com. Also follow the hashtags at LGI2 on social media. Joining us today to share their personal stories are Miranda Jones. She is the Vice President, Youth, Family, and Clinical Services. Chris Brennan, he is an innovative educator and teaches upper elementary school children. Tracy Berry McGee is a counselor and founder of Vimani Counseling and Sister Keeper Empowerment Center. And Lisa Prinster-Messi is a concerned and committed parent. I am happy to have all of you here. Lisa, talk about why you are so concerned.
I have lots of concerns, first of all, but recently, my third grade son had come home from hearing a story on the news and actually on a golf course. I thought was an odd place for an adult to be talking about a police shooting and that someone had been shot by a policeman, and he was concerned, obviously. He's 9 years old, and he said, "Mom, do you mean that someone may not like," and he had mentioned a friend's name in his class, "because of the color of their skin?" And I found for the first time, and keep in mind I have a 10th grader as well, I found myself at a loss. My instincts didn't kick in. There was nothing there to grasp onto. I didn't know how to answer. It was on the news, and immediately after it being on the news was the retaliation and the shootings of the police. And I immediately turned it off because my first thought was, if he sees that, then he's going to think that the first one was justified. And it's how am I going to tell a 9-year-old that none of this is justified? And how am I going to have this conversation? So I seriously laid awake that night after having failed miserably. Probably not my first failure, but my first real failure that resonated with, I know it's not my first failure. But it became painfully aware to me that I had a responsibility not just to deliver to this world an educated, polite child that could easily ignore. I could easily turn off this TV. I could easily create a world that could ignore this for him. and I would be shirking my responsibilities. My responsibility is to send a child out there that will help, that will change, that will stand up for his friends. And I had this helpless feeling of, is it too late for us at this age? But that I wasn't going to let it be too late for my 9-year-old. And Jade and I are friends, and I'd been following her on Facebook and watching all of these conversations, and I just kind of started chiming in on some of these conversations from my perspective, and what can I do? I Googled for books, for children's books. There are none. There are no children's books for me to find to explain to my child, which also felt like a cop-out. Why couldn't I find the words? And it was upsetting. It was humbling. I felt like I failed. And I felt, how can I be 48 years old and not know how to have this conversation? And it was a little embarrassing, frankly, to reach out to Jade and say, what do I do? So it was really just maybe 6 months ago that I thought, yeah, I can't, this is not, blissful ignorance is not okay. It's still ignorance. It's not malicious, but it's still ignorance. And I felt compelled to find a way to change. And so Jade and I continued these conversations, and that's how I arrived here. I still don't feel any smarter about about that situation, but I'm open, and I have found that more people, Jade was surprised about my support of this, and that broke my heart a little bit, because I think the realization is that there's so many like me that are afraid to say anything because we're afraid we'll say the wrong thing. Where I think the perception is that we don't care. Where I think it's a tiny percentage that, that probably don't. And there's a really large percentage that I would put myself in that category that want to do better, want to know more, want to figure out a way to make this better for my children, your children, because we all want the same thing. And so that's why I'm here. I'm here to learn. Maybe I can teach something. Maybe I know you can teach me something. But if we don't talk and I stay in my blissful, ignorant world and pretend everything's okay just because those kids are smiling, doesn't mean everything's okay.
Thank you. Miranda, you mentioned that you had a difficult time talking about Ferguson with the children you work with.
Yes. Well, actually, I work with a lot of children, but I have 3 children of my own. At the time, one was 12, one was 7, and one was 2. And we actually live in the area where all these things were happening. So, just having to come home, and at the time, we came home during the time that the we would call it riot. Some people say riot, some people say the unrest, all the different things, but it was happening, and we were on our way home coming down Lucas and Hunt, and we had to drive through all of these things that were going on. And so I started saying, okay, we can't go this way, and the kids know how we're going home. I'm taking evasive maneuvers, and I said, hey, first of all, we're safe. Everything's fine. First of all, you're gonna be okay. Mama got this. So I had to make sure they knew that they were safe. But at the time, there were trucks going down with people with masks on, and the 2-year-old was just like, "Wee, this is fun, right?" She's like, the 7-year-old was a bit concerned, but the 12-year-old was very concerned. Mommy, what is going on here? What's happening? She was aware of what had happened, the day before, and we live in the area, so all the stores were shutting down, and it was a really hard situation to discuss with that 12-year-old who goes to a school that is predominantly Caucasian, and they weren't talking about it. Or they were talking about what was their fear of someone coming into Clayton and blowing up the water system, not what happened to Michael Brown or what's happening in the neighborhood that we're living in. So she was really bottled up. And we got home that night, and I was at a struggle. It's hard for us to figure out how you make sense of this. Like, really, there are tanks at Target? How do I process that? I had to, so after we're trying to get ourselves together, then we have to go and talk to the kids. And my husband and I are quite opposite. He's like, they'll be fine. I'm the no, we need to talk to them. So we have a difference in our household of just how we address and how we decide to talk to kids. So I decided, we talked about, I said, there's a lot going on. We're going to wait this out. This is something that, we have to let it play itself out, but you're going to be safe. The biggest thing is that you're safe and that we got you. And the next day I decided, working with Better Family Life, we had been down in the neighborhood. We had set up in Canfield Green and knew the neighbors and knew everyone there. I said, I'm taking my daughter down there. And my husband's like, you're doing what? Right. And I said, well, I just said, well, let me not talk too much more to him because I don't want him to get upset. But I knew that, we went right down to the area where some members of the Lost Voices, and these were some of those kids, and a lot of them were college students that were protesting. And I took her right down there, and one of the guys came up to the car. He had his mask on. He takes his mask off and says, "Hey, Miss Miranda, how you doing?"
The kid.
Just as polite and as articulate, and she was shocked. I mean, she was so afraid.
That brought more dimension to her. We're going to go more into that and about why you made the decision to take your daughter down there and the connectivity of why we seem to be talking about the same thing but not quite saying what we're talking about. That's probably why we are here today. So we'll take a quick break, and when we return, we will come back with What Shall We Tell the Children?
Tragedy can happen at any given moment. It rips your heart into pieces and leaves you grieving. Your heart deals with a roller coaster of emotions. You experience denial, anger, bargaining, and even depression from losing a loved one. But don't lose hope. There is help. Mending Heart Foundation offers services which include grief counseling, urban violence awareness, veterans assistance, veteran suicide prevention, drug overdose awareness, and funeral hardship assistance. If you need help, contact Mending Hearts Foundation at 314-941-3448 Missouri or 618-353-4919 Illinois. Learn more now at www.mendingheartsfoundation.org.
Welcome back, Jade Harrell's Let's Get It Together. In today's show, what shall we tell the children? Let's continue our conversation with guests Tracy, Chris, Miranda, and Lisa. Now, Chris, you had a pretty interesting situation happen at the school that put you in a bit of a dilemma. Tell us what happened.
Sure, yeah, and I think as a little bit of background, the school at which I teach, it is pre-kindergarten all the way up to senior in high school. So it expands, and as part of our curriculum, it's very deliberate that we have both these windows and mirrors sort of experiences, and by that, if you're not familiar with that, just the idea that there's some experiences that we're going to see where we can't necessarily make connections with, and then there's some experiences that, as part of curriculum, we're exposed to, and we see a part of us as part of that. That's the mirror experience. So it's very deliberate. And also empathy is something that's very deliberately taught as part of our curriculum. So there's a lot of things that we have prepared for as teachers to have these difficult conversations. But I had an experience with a student who actually, it had been reported to me that at our extended day program, which is enrichment courses after school, it had been reported that this student, when a parent had come in with their uniform of a firefighter, and not the full, what we would think of with the hoses and the hat, but he looked very much like a police officer. And when he came into the classroom to pick up his son, who was also in the class, a student had said, "Uh-oh, the police are here, what do we do?" And that the response was, "We put our hands up, don't shoot." And so this had been reported to me. I wasn't there at the time, but it required a conversation with the students afterwards.
Talk about the difference between the students and why the conversation then went further.
Sure. And as far as the students the parent is white. And the parent had reported that 2 African-American students are the ones that had said, "Hands up, don't shoot." So that's how it comes to us. And so we talked to the extended day, the enrichment folk, and say, who were the students involved? And it wasn't quite certain, but the only thing we had to go on was that these were 2 black students that were involved with this. So I talked to the 1 black student in my class. We have a special lunch meeting. And I bring in the black student from the other class, and I said, this is where we're at. This is what was reported. Right away, it's very immediate that the 1 student has no idea what I'm talking about. He says, I was at the enrichment class, but I have no idea what you're talking. I don't know why I'm here. And the other student right away said, yes, I did. I put my hands up and said, hands up, don't shoot. But as the conversation comes forth, it's actually revealed to us that it was 2 white students who were the ones that had said, the cops are coming, what do we do? Hands up, don't shoot. So it presented to me a very kind of sticky situation because I didn't know how to respond. I had a parent, a white parent, who for some reason had seen 2 black students in there, had heard someone say, hands up, don't shoot, and then had reported that these were the students that were involved with this.
And then we find out when you're having the lunch meeting, the separated meeting with the 2 black students. That's where your discovery occurred.
And this is where I'm discovering. So this is when it gets to, how do I have this conversation then? I've prepared for all of these difficult conversations, yet how does this one student who's been brought in simply because he was a black student in the class and has no idea what we're talking about, how do I take care of his feelings? And then also the student who was very quick to acknowledge that, yes, I was part of this, how do we take care of his feelings? And then how do we take care of the feelings of the student whose dad came to pick him up, who was very concerned, and he was crying because he saw his dad very upset about this and about the reaction. So there's so many parties involved. And despite our best efforts of preparing for something like this, I was at a loss of what do we tell the children?
And
what do I
could
say?
you have possibly said for each dynamic that was involved in that?
Right, and that's and the kids were very quick. Kids are fantastic. Upper elementary kids are fantastic, and what they were most concerned about was taking care of their friend who felt upset. They said, "We'll go talk to him today. We will," and that's that empathy that we work on a daily basis. But we'll go talk to him. We'll make sure that he feels okay. But yet, as I left for that day, I thought the feelings of this one child who was just really roped into it simply for the fact that he was black. How do we take care of his feelings?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's where it really got. It's a difficult sort of conversation there.
Yeah, it is. Tracy Berry McGee, you work with young people. You're a licensed therapist. You certainly understand from a young girl's perspective that you speak on all the time, but you're also a mother of a son.
Yes.
Bring into perspective your lived experience with this.
Well, first off, I think, as Lisa stated, being a parent, there's no template that comes with being a parent. And so you often wonder, how do I say the right thing? And when you're in the moment, it's okay to be able to say, I don't have the answers, but I'm brave enough to figure out what those answers are. And also to realize that every moment is a teachable moment. And even from a teacher's perspective, to say that you practice empathy on a daily basis is what I feel is important. My son is 17. He needed to see, that I have faith in him and that he had the answers, but my husband had to allow him to see that fear was real, but we can't live in fear. And so as a result of that, they both have had those concepts of experiencing things that as a woman, even as my daughters, we have witnessed them experience those things, but we didn't experience them.
Sure.
So his concept was totally different.
Right, right. And he has an interesting opportunity by having a mother in the practice, in the clinical side, but also from an empathetic side, but then his dad who's living the same thing.
And I think the biggest thing that I realized just being up here in this moment,
Yeah.
how trauma is so real. Because how do we have a conversation with our children is different from taking us right back to the moment that Lisa spoke about. And it could be any young man that was shot, but it went right back to an issue that impacts our community, and it just comes up like it's nothing.
Right.
And it is something,
It
and
still is.
it creates trauma.
We're going to go into that more, so we'll take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to check in with our audience. You guys ready? All right, when we come back, we'll get it together with our audience.
Most of us plan ahead for our children's education, weddings, family vacations, and other significant expected life events. But what about really planning for our final funeral expenses? We must also plan for the end of life by pre-planning, being prepared for final funeral arrangements. Families are often at a big loss when planning for a loved one. When you die with uncertain plans, not only is the family experiencing the loss, but oftentimes it leaves the family begging, asking for or borrowing money, selling assets, or raiding their savings to cover funeral and burial expenses. They struggle financially. Your pre-planning will ease stress to your loved ones left behind and help in the most vulnerable and difficult time in their lives. Determine your legacy. Contact Serenity to understand all the affordable benefits of pre-planning and let us help you with your pre-need services. Call 618-233-6000.
Translating, filtering, engaging our children. We're asking, what shall we tell the children? So we're going to go to our audience. Your thoughts, any questions, any comments, any engagement? Come on up.
This is sort of a statement that can be discussed and kind of to help you also in regards to that we all struggle this no matter what the age. At the time, a Ferguson resident, my son, we would take him back and forth to work. I mean, we stayed right around the corner from the police station off of North Florissant. And as you would come home, you'd always have to take a different route because they're out there. There's protesters out there, and on the corner of Suburban, there was tanks and military people and everything. So now I have to struggle with the dilemma in regards to my son wanting to go and participate. I mean, he's 19, he's old enough to make his own decisions, but you're concerned for what has occurred, but you're also concerned for your child, you know, and you don't want to make them, honey, do you really want to go up there? I mean, you know, you believe in this, you got to allow them to go, but that's just a statement that we all struggle, no matter what the age, no matter how old your child is, no matter who you are, we're all struggling with this, and there's so many layers to the problem, you don't even know where to start. Yeah. So.
Anybody share that same sentiment, Lisa? Oh, you felt something too.
Well,
I did.
The struggle is the empathy, because when something like this happens, I immediately try to put myself in someone else's situation, and I just put myself in your situation. And you know, here I am worried about having a conversation, and you're worried about sending your boys out, and it's just a different. I can never feel what you feel, but I think about you, and I think about Jade, and I think about my friends who send their boys out, and how that must be. And I only hope that from that, and from you just sharing that at least by feeling that a little bit of pain and that little bit of uncomfortable, you know, I just teared up, that I can find something to say from that. So thank you so much.
Anyone else? Please. I did say, who's lovely? Is that what I said? And you said, that was me.
I have a question for the gentleman on the panel. You spoke about teaching empathy at your school, and I would like for you to give us an example of what that looks like and what that lesson is about.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a deliberate mindset where every day we start, at least in upper elementary, with a morning meeting. And I think that's very common throughout schools, probably in St. Louis. But the idea of the morning meeting, when we talk about respect and how we're greeting each other, there always is naturally brought in an example of something that's happening in the news. For example, with the elections, this has been fodder for how do you speak respectfully with each other. And so we practice, actually, we are going to say a contradictory statement. Someone is going to say good morning, you're going to give a contradictory statement like, it's not a good morning. And then how do we work through this? It's a lot of lessons that are led by me, but it really is the kids coming up with these ideas and me really directing them in the right direction. So if you say to a student, it's a great day today, or good morning, and they say, how do you deal with this? So we work through with those kids that you ask them, and is everything okay this morning? Do you feel all right? And that's when you get those real conversations. I had a student in my class last year who was from Ferguson, who had joined us a little bit later in the year, and it wasn't until we started doing these morning meetings and started this sort of greeting when she started talking about it and say, well, I didn't get any sleep last night. And it would be very quick to move on and say, okay, well, great, let's go on to the next person. But instead stopping and having the students start responding, well, why didn't you get sleep last night? Well, because they were shouting out the windows. I saw cars driving by my windows and it scared me. That brought up those natural conversations, and it would only have been possible if we had those, really had directed them in those empathetic conversations. Does that make sense a bit?
What I hear is the stopping and how valuable it is to stop for a moment
It's exactly right.
consider.
The stopping is what you need to do. Just
We
to
can
stop
take
and
one more
listen.
question. Sure, Ms. Simone.
So I appreciated you, Tracy, sharing your experience. The comment that I'd like to make is how we help our children express their grief, their pain. I think that is part of where we miss it because we get locked in our own fear and we're uncomfortable with our own, how we react to what's happening, that we find it difficult to facilitate their expression. So what would you offer as tools for us to help our children to express their pain?
That's an excellent question, and you'd be great to answer that.
Well, one of the things that we do in our Sister Keeper circles that I think you can use in families, you can use in schools, you can use in community conversations, courageous conversations such as these. We call it the love principle. Basically, we listen to each other, which is really crucial because a lot of times everybody wants to talk at the same time. So listen, observe our nonverbals, observe when we're angry, observe when we don't want to be touched, observe when we really need a hug. Validate. Validation is crucial. Your truth is your truth, so own your truth. So validate each other. And then at the end of the day, empower one another because we all we got. So we have to get there together. So if we can empower one another, then we can make it. So it's the love principle. And that's something we apply in all of our circles. And it applies in our home and it can apply to our community.
Sure. And would apply to a child that's grieving.
A child that's grieving because it gives them that voice and you're able to listen and hear where they are, meeting them where they are.
Sure. I like that it gives them a tool even to ask for help.
I love that.
So we've heard from our guests and we've heard from our audience. We also want to hear from you. So make sure you join the conversation using the hashtag LGI2, LGI, the number 2, and stay up to date and connected with everything we've got going on with the show. We're going to meet the experts when we come back. Stay with us. And welcome back, Jade Harrell's Let's Get It Together, although it belongs to all of us. But when it comes to navigating the world and minds of children, our guests do so on a regular basis. But they find innovative ways to meet them where they are, changing in this changing world around them. I'd like to introduce Steve Zwolak, CEO and Executive Director of the Loom Institute and University Children's Center. DeMarco Davidson is the Executive Director of the Michael Brown Foundation. We also have with us Lisa Lyle, the head of school of MICDS, and author and nutritionist and #1 health podcast in the country, Sean Stevenson, is with us as well. I want to start with you, Ms. Lyle. Now, you are the head of a school that spans the gamut of junior kindergarten all the way up to senior high school. What do you think about what you've heard so far from our previous panelists?
Well, it touches me deeply because I think each of us as adults is working hard to shape conversations with kids that allow kids to be confident, resilient, curious as they go into the world. And so much of what swirls around them increases the likelihood, if they internalize it, that they show up less than themselves. Mm-hmm. And that scares me to death. We need kids showing up fully themselves, confident, hungry to contribute, resilient, and believing in the best intentions of the world, right?
Sure.
But there's a lot out there that give them doubt about that.
Yeah, right. Well, then we take it to you, DeMarco, as the executive director of the Michael Brown Foundation. This is the epicenter of much of the conversation today, on a regular basis, in the news, and has really spanned the gamut across the world. What are your thoughts about what you heard earlier?
So it definitely was painful, but hopeful. The pain comes from one, having to have those conversations with the young people that I mentor, as well as the conversations that were had with me growing up, and recognizing that these conversations are not happening in every household, and they're not even happening in every black household either, to be honest. At the same time, it's slightly hopeful because to hear that there are white parents having these conversations is helpful. At the same time, it's also slightly painful because I recognize that in some of the, I'm not in those white households, but I would imagine that when they have these conversations, it's about awareness. When we have these conversations, it's about survival. And in fact, Trinity United Church of Christ developed a video, 10 things what you should do when you pulled over by the police. 10, the top 10. It's more. There's a laundry list. So it's about survival for us, while it's awareness for some. But hopefully that awareness will turn over to changing the systems that create us to have these conversations.
Sure. Now, Steve, you work on this through your organization and with the youngest of our children as well as the caregivers. How do you approach that?
Well, first of all, we have to have clarity that if we want to change society, we must start with our youngest children. If we think they're going to go into kindergarten, we're going to make the difference, we're wrong. We have developmental knowledge about how children grow and learn. The research says that children begin understanding differences as early as 6 months of age. Very clear.
What kind of differences?
Well, first, there's two lines of the research that's out there. One, the typical developing kid will understand the difference between faces, mommy and daddy with hat, mommy and daddy with glasses, and they understand those differences. But the research also says that children as young as 6 months of age demonstrate color preferences. 6 months of age are demonstrating color preferences. We know that. There was a lot of conversation around empathy, and empathy is something that is sparking in the brain pre-verbally. So we're missing the opportunities if we don't start young. And so at University City Children's Center, we work with teachers to help understand how to facilitate empathy. And there was a question earlier about how do you teach empathy? And how do we facilitate empathy in the very youngest children? And how do we help teachers understand how to be an emotional partner with children? Because we're finding more and more of our children without emotional partners. And if we think we're going to get them to be academic learners, we're really, really mistaken.
Yeah. Well, Sean, let's check in with you. Empathy, compassion are keywords for you. What did you hear?
Yes, I'm very, very impressed with the conversation and excited because for me, personally, I have 3 kids as well. And a name that I haven't heard today is Tamir Rice. And that particularly really hurt me. And seeing just the thought that my kid can go out to play and not come back again. And from that space, I was very irritated, upset, difficulty sleeping, and I wrote a book on sleep. So it's kind of ironic, but I really had to get back to what my gift is, because I can go out and, it's very frustrating for a lot of us, but what can I actually do about it? And I'm very action oriented. I heard the word solution, but I want to focus more on that. And so my gift is to help people to feel good. And I know that hurt people tend to be individuals who hurt people, right? And also a lot of us, we don't do well because we don't feel well. So my question is, how do we exercise compassion and empathy if our brain isn't working properly, right? And a big part of that is the sleep we're getting. And I've got to mention this really quickly. UC Berkeley did some brain scans. And they looked at each hour of sleep deprivation that we get, we start to lose action and activity in your prefrontal cortex. This is the part of your brain responsible for decision making, social control, distinguishing between right and wrong. We can't do those things if we're not caring for ourselves.
Well, we're going to keep this conversation going on here in the studio and go a little deeper into this moving conversation. So make sure you tune in to part 2 and watch the next Let's Get It Together for this episode. We want to thank our sponsors, the Kwame Foundation, with 100% graduation rate for their gentlemen mentees at Carnahan, and the Mending Hearts Foundation, hope and solutions for families in need. We also want to thank Vector Communications for sponsoring our opinion poll, and your responses are welcome as well. Visit lgi2.com. That's LGI, the number 2.com. Of course, follow the hashtags LGI2 on the social media so that you can keep up with us. So we will continue to stick it out and get it together.